Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Karindundu Wash Process Kenya from Say Coffee. And there's the box right there. And Say, based out of Brooklyn, New York, and this coffee was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video as part of the Battle of the Tomato, where it finished second place out of 5 wash processed Kenyans on that day. If you watched that video, then you saw that we were able to pick this coffee out from the other ones because it had a little bit more of a unique and distinct sweetness relative to those other coffees. And I think the ability to pick that out came from the fact that we had just recently reviewed a Karindundu from Sweet Bloom, which this moment is one of my favorite wash processed Kenyans that we have ever reviewed on this channel. And somehow we have never reviewed a Kenyan coffee from Say, so this felt like the perfect opportunity to compare and contrast those two coffees as well as review a Say Kenyan coffee. This right here is day 26. Recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, is 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and I like this one better through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Say is an American light for the roast profile. With those things out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and this coffee bucked a lot of the trends and expectations for both a Say coffee as well as a Kenyan coffee, because in theory, I fully expected this coffee to be not just savory, but maybe on the higher side of savory. And I believe the flavor notes on here were all kind of skewing a little bit more towards a citric and tart direction, but I wasn't experiencing either of those factors on this first day, as the cup actually came out somewhat brown candied sweet. And that was the most dominant and distinct factor in this cup of coffee, and that was a positive first impression given that citrus isn't necessarily my favorite. Don't love savoriness to coffee, so having something a little bit on the sweeter side was really nice for me, so really enjoyed that day 14 first impression. Day 16, another nice day of this coffee as it continued to skew a little bit more towards the candied sweetness side of things, which was, again, kind of surprising. Not a whole lot of the savoriness or bright citrus, not really in line with the expectations to this moment, still a little bit more on the candied side of things, so still positive. Day 17, finally starting to feel a slight bit of the savoriness, and this is when I bumped up the temperatures, and I think that I was able to extract a little bit more from this cup of coffee. And as a result, some of those more hidden savory components were coming from it, in addition to a little bit more of the citrus. However, the cup still remained pretty clean in general, with a little bit more of a dark, hard, candied sort of sweetness to this cup of coffee. Slightly sugary, still pretty positive overall. We continue on as day 19, the cup of coffee finally took a significantly stronger shift towards the citric direction. And I always joke that if a Say box of coffee doesn't have a citric flavor note on there, then they're just hiding the fact that there's going to be some citrus in their cup of coffee, because I don't recall ever having reviewed a Say coffee that doesn't have at least some citrus in it. And at this moment was experiencing so much more of it, in addition to some slight red fruits in the cup. I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of the shift, given that I really enjoy candied sweetness, so not necessarily liking the direction of this coffee, but we continue on as day 20. Another day experiencing yet another shift as the seemingly absent savoriness has finally started to make more of a presence today, as it's complementing a stronger citrus. So now we're experiencing that citrus as well as the savoriness from this coffee. Slight bit of the initial candied sweetness, but in significantly smaller abundance, so I'm really not liking the direction that this coffee is going to this moment. Day 22, coffee has essentially come full circle now at this point, because the savoriness is now toning itself down, and in its place we're getting a lot more of this kind of lemon candied sweetness, so we're kind of putting all of these factors together, and this has become probably the most dominant component to this cup of coffee, as it's also complemented by some bright tart red fruits and subtle red florality, a little bit more of that herbal florality. I believe they have a hibiscus note list on here. That's what I always say, red floral herbality always leads to hibiscus for me. Day 24, at the end, the cup can only be characterized by somewhat wild inconsistency, because it initially started off candied sweet, then became a lot more citric, then became a lot more savory, then became a mix of those things, and now it's somewhat evenly balanced, but at the same time I can't seem to get this coffee to be similar on 2 different days. Essentially, just a lot of factors that are kind of lumped in together, and it works. I think it works well. I'm not saying that there's any sort of misdirection in this cup of coffee, it's just different a lot. Alright, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. Alright, and a lot of level 4s, I have a feeling already that I'm going to argue at this tasting wheel, so let's run through it best we can. Cleanliness, level 4, it's definitely on the cleaner side of Kenyan coffee, so I think that one's justified. Certain days I like it a little bit more on that 4. I think it's a 4 though, we'll keep it there, that's good. Finish, level 4, said in the last video that it's very rare that a Kenyan scores lower than level 4, and I don't think we ever have, and that's going to continue on this one. So this has a very bright, fun, nice finish to this cup of coffee, definitely justified there. Pretty sweet, especially for a Kenyan too, definitely justified at the level 4. The acidity at the higher temperatures, maybe if you're being super generous, could bump it all the way up to a level 5, but I quite like the balance of acidity in this cup of coffee. It's definitely going to be there, being both a Sei coffee as well as a Kenyan coffee. But even then, I think keeping it there at that level 4 mark and about a perfect level 4 mark is a really good representation for this coffee. Berry fruit, level 4. Yeah, the sort of tart red berries definitely become a little bit more prominent later in this coffee. On the earlier days, I think I can hardly justify bumping it above a level 2, but it definitely became more prominent as this coffee had aged. Citrus fruit, level 4, same thing with the berry fruit. Early days, we're looking at level 2 at the highest, but by now it's definitely justified as a level 4. Could arguably say the most dominant factor at this time. Saltiness, of course, a little bit there. The caramel, it's kind of that brown candied sweetness that I've been alluding to, and on the earlier days, I could have that all the way up to a level 4. It's present yet again today. I think it just goes to show just how sensitive this coffee is to brewing. So, day I made this tasting wheel, definitely justified on level 3. Today, back to that level 4. I think it's the best component to this coffee. Bitterness, level 3. I'm going to argue with this one again because it's not overly bitter. That bitterness comes from citrus, so I would bump that down to a level 2 today. As well as the savoriness, because once again, the savoriness, while kind of higher on this day at a level 3, certain days could have been all the way up to a level 4, especially at the higher temperatures, and days like today, it can be bumped all the way down to a level 2. I think that's why I really like the Chemex for this coffee, because it does strip away a little bit of the savoriness, bitterness, and in its place you get a little bit more of the candied sweetness. And so when I made this tasting one with a V60, it's not quite as good as it was with the Chemex, so I think I'm just kind of keeping those things in mind. Body, level 2, that's kind of surprising for a V60 Kenyan, but it's there. I think I was just going to show that it's a little bit lighter of a body than most Kenyans I experience. But for the most part, yeah, I don't really agree with too much of this tasting wheel today, but that's what's going to happen with kind of inconsistent coffees in general. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I actually have not gone back and tried that Coffea Circular coffee since that blind taste test video, so I imagine that one's probably still my favorite because that one had even more complexity to it, but this one has a nice bit of complexity. I think the first thing I wanted to do with this coffee was compare it by the Sweet Bloom coffee, and the Sweet Bloom coffee was significantly more consistent than this one. I was getting a little bit more clarity, about equal sweetness, but less acidity in that Sweet Bloom coffee. So I think that's why I'm going to skew a little bit more towards that one, as I like that one probably a fair bit more than this coffee, for whatever that's worth. And it's been really interesting hearing feedback on this coffee, because a lot of people have tried this coffee and a lot of people have had a lot of impressions of this coffee, and they're a little all over the board, which goes to show that if you give this coffee to a bunch of different people, they're all going to have pretty different experiences to this one, and that seems to be a theme with a lot of Sei's coffees as well. So that's kind of the way I felt about this one anyway. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I think sometimes when there's not a whole bunch of savoriness to Kenyan coffees and you kind of want to steer people that may love their more savory coffees away from them, because I've noticed that the type of Kenyans I tend to like tend not to be this type of Kenyans that more traditional Kenyan drinkers enjoy. So if you're anti-traditional Kenyans, you don't love the savory components to them, I think this one's a pretty good fit for you. It can be a little frustrating from time to time with the inconsistency, but even then, I liked the sweetness that came from this coffee. It's one of my favorite Kenyans of the year in general. I think it's a really nice coffee. It's probably not placing anywhere in our favorite coffees of the year list, but even then, it was still a really enjoyable drink for the entire duration I was drinking it. For the most part though, I think I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Karindundu Wash Processed Kenya from Sei Coffee. Thank you for watching.